On this week's episode of Inside Outside Innovation, we sit down with Jeremy Kourdi and Jonathan Besser, authors of the new book, 50 Ideas That Changed the World of Work. From the growth mindset to business model canvas, we delve into their guidebook for some of the key concepts, models, and frameworks that are shaping business, leadership, and workplace dynamics. Let's get started. Inside Outside Innovation is a podcast to help new innovators navigate what's next. Each week, we'll give you a front row seat into what it takes to learn, grow, and thrive in today's world of accelerating change and uncertainty. Join us as we explore, engage, and experiment with the best and the brightest innovators, entrepreneurs, and pioneering businesses. It's time to get started. Welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, and as always, we have some amazing guests. Today, we have Jeremy Kourdi and Jonathan Besser, authors of the new book, 50 Ideas That Changed the World of Work. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Brian.
I'm excited to have you guys on because the title alone got me intrigued to reach out to you, 50 Ideas That Changed the World of Work. And when I got a copy of it, it did open my eyes to all the amazing work that has gone on over the years, talking about innovation and workplace dynamics and leadership. And you've decided to take on the amazing work of how do you tackle this mass body of work that all these other people have put together and put it into a book of your own?
The first thing is to do it with someone. You'll know this, Brian. You'll certainly appreciate it. That life, leadership, business, certainly innovation is easier if you have someone that you understand, that you know, that you respect. Crucially, that you have a great connection with. I always say one of the great things about rapport and connection is that then means you can disagree, you can challenge, you can push back. And the other person that you're challenging or disagreeing with knows you're on their side, knows where you're coming from, and appreciates that.
I mean, Jer and I have known each other for a number of years. We've worked together, we've collaborated, we've disagreed agreeably, we've argued along the way. But hopefully 50 Ideas is the output from that discussion, from that partnership, from working together, and hopefully gives a different angle that people will enjoy and use. They'll stand the test of time.
What I liked about it is, again, you talk about emotional intelligence, growth mindset, blue ocean strategy, SWOT analysis, business model canvas. I mean, the list is again, 50 plus. First of all, to pull that together, how did you decide which particular ideas were the ones most worthy of going into a book? And what was the process of pulling that together?
There was kind of a mental arm wrestle as you went through. I think Jer and I started with a long list, and with the help of our publisher and long discussions between the two of us, we whittled it down to what we thought stood the test of time. What do people want to hear, and what would be useful to people from Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is centuries old, right through to some of the more modern concepts like Lean In, Samberg's Lean In, which is really very new, and the pieces that come in between that help you understand. The intention is to give people to act as a reference book and as a first starting point. The book can be one that you can dip into. I just heard about MBTI. Let me go in to have a look at that chapter. I got this great reference book. To also the book that feeds through from the 50 different chapters coming through, that builds upon concept and idea and references back to itself as it goes along. It was a collaboration of what we both thought, and Jeremy and I have known each other a long time. We've worked well together over all those years, and it was really the way that it came together. We had a lot of synergy and not too much disagreement.
The themes we have, I think, are absolutely on the mark, and they, as Jonathan alluded to, as you alluded to, Brian, they come out really strongly. And what really interested me was some of those themes. So you see the rise, particularly over the last 30 years, of psychology in business and leadership. So really not just understanding your customers, which used to be the thing in the 80s and 90s perhaps, but currently it's getting to a level of customer understanding, empathy, customer experience is the new frontier there. Getting to a level of that insight, really, that's really valuable. So psychology, and not just relating to customers, but for decision-making, neuroscience, coaching, something like growth mindset. So psychology is a theme that goes through it. And balanced with that is rigor and the use of data, particularly whether that's in things like assessment tools for promotion and succession or career development, or again, for innovation. What is our data telling us, and have we got the balance right between art and science, between intuition and data? And that's another theme that kind of comes up
what I liked about it, it brings together both classical models and modern innovations like you talked about. It reminded me of things that, oh yeah, I studied that back when I got my MBA decades ago, but it was still relevant today. But I hadn't looked at that or thought about that particular model in a while. And so I think
Interesting that there's a new context. So if it's not a new idea, then it's certainly deserving of a new context. So something like looking after customers is not new. I think, frankly, as I sit here in the UK, that issue needs to come again. The service we get from our financial services organizations, maybe globally, certainly in the UK, from banks, insurers, was better in the past than it is now. I think they've kind of been outflanked by technology or the need to drive down costs or shareholder value, other issues which have changed the world of work. But then they've kind of not adapted customer experience and customer focus to the new context. And to take banking as an example, I think there's more that can be done there. So new ideas, but as you say, Brian, kind of perennial ideas in a new context.
yeah, some of the ideas maybe have been overlooked and deserve to come back to be at least studied again. Are there particular ideas within the book that you think are more relevant in the disruptive times we're living in today?
I think they all have relevance. I think there are different pieces. We're working in a smaller, faster, quicker, narrower frame with the world, the way it's changing, with geopolitics, with all the elements that are feeding into it. We got news that's appearing on the second. We have a computer in our pocket that sometimes makes phone calls, that is constantly keeping us updated or distracted for where we are. I think they all have relevance where we are. And equally, there is a factor of personalization, whether it be understanding yourself through neurodiversity or understanding what makes you tick and different ways of working. You have to personalize your approach and relevance to what it is. That's a very broad spectrum, read every 50 chapters answer, but I think they're all relevant in what we do.
It's a personal thing, isn't it? For me, I was amazed, frankly, that Lean In took as long as it did to be published and to become an issue of significance. And when I kind of looked at the book and the work and the concept, and I thought, man, where was that 40 years ago or longer? Where was that for my mother? All the marginalized groups that we've seen in the workplace, frankly, for far too long. And I was glad to include it. And I was really surprised that, frankly, the world of work hadn't gotten itself together. And I'm not saying that even today it's gotten itself together. I think there's much more that still needs to be done, but there's certainly more awareness of that issue than there was before. And that's long overdue for sure. But the other idea that for me underpins a lot of the thinking about, to your point, Brian, about innovation, is Carol Dweck's growth mindset. Really do. Whether it's disruptive innovation, whether it's particular techniques you're using or blue ocean strategy or whatever aspect of innovation. Is it about innovating products? Is it about processes? Is it about business models? That kind of positive, forward-thinking approach, I think, is really, really valuable. And I see around me too much individuals and organizations being reactive and kind of getting beaten up by events a little bit. And I can understand that because they're unfamiliar and they're scary. They're things like, big competitors or global pandemics or economic and political policies that we haven't seen in 100 years. There's all manner of unfamiliar things arising and scaring people. And I think the ability to have a growth mindset, to think, okay, in all this, there has to be opportunity, and I am going to take control and I'm going to try and find a way through this. It's interesting, it's stimulating, it's rewarding. Frankly, it's the only game in town. And I always say that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And I think that speaks to the kind of proactivity in something like Dweck's growth mindset.
What I'd add on top of what Jeremy said is there's a piece about the personal discovery and personal leadership that takes you along the journey. I think as the world gets faster, as it continues to evolve in where we are and what we're doing, there's a journey of self-discovery. There's the generation Wi-Fi, as I like to call them. They don't know the world without the internet or the computer in your pocket that makes the phone call, and allows you for that self-discovery, which is where you can bring pockets in, from radical candor to emotional intelligence to grow as a coaching model, all the other elements that feed in to innovation, to self-discovery.
You talk about things like psychological safety and emotional intelligence, some of these kind of softer skills. But unlike a lot of business books that focus on either one side or the other, like soft skills or hard skills, and other books like Business Model Canvas is probably more tactical in nature, you kind of combine them both and given the reader an opportunity to see the holistic approach that you really need in business, and how to understand and navigate it, and then again look at proven frameworks to understand what's the next thing they need to be doing.
And you can't live one without the other, really. I mean, I think we've seen that in day in, day out, what we're doing. We're feeling it, we're living it, and certainly that's our perspective, which is why we approached it with the way we did.
Do you have favorites?
For me, I love growth mindset, as I mentioned. You just touched on the GROW model. And what I like about John Whitmore's GROW model is it's goal-oriented, and there's an outcome, there's an impact, a result at the end of it. So whether you're coaching others, whether you're frankly coaching yourself, or whether you're just thinking through an issue, what's the goal here? What's the reality? What's the options? What's the way forward? Have I got the will? When is it going to happen? All those W's at the end. That speaks to me. So grow for sure. Growth mindset, I love. I do like the practical, tactical tools. I mean, Osterwalder's business model canvas, a business plan on a page, comprehensively, everything you need, all the ingredients on one page. And I think that's quite something as well, really. So coming back to a point you've touched on earlier, I just love the blend of the ideas. Your point about hard and soft. What I came to realize as we were writing the book was actually if you blend something like the business model canvas with the need to sell and influence and build those close associative relationships with resellers, for example, or you need to really put yourself in the shoes of those customers on that side. And Osterwalder highlights, customers and resellers and routes to market in a kind of cold, dispassionate way. But if you add to that some of the soft skills, well, how strong are our relationships with our resellers? Have I even asked them what they think of the product or what they think might come next? Heck, they're closer to the market than I am. Maybe a conversation with them is important, or a relationship where they feel they can come to me and say, do you know what? This is what we're hearing. So if you blend the harder traditional aspects with the soft, I mean, another example would be shareholder value, which I always thought of as a really, an accountant's issue or a CFO's issue. But then if you're a manager or a leader and you start thinking like a shareholder, start making decisions, encourage your team to make decisions like it's your money, like you're a shareholder, then that blend of something like shareholder value and team development, let's say, that can be really potent as well. So for me, there's a lot there about the combination, I think.
How did you narrow it down and get it to be so succinct and actionable, in 50 books in one book?
The truth is, Brian, that we probably offended people along the way by missing elements out, for which we apologize. And the intention is that you cover 50 concepts, 50 ideas within a single book, and it can't be a book of thousands of pages. So we followed a very simple structure, really, to try and make it manageable and navigatable, whereby you start with each concept about what is the big picture, what's the idea as you go through, and then go straight into about the idea. That's the header for where it is, what we're doing. Then moving really into what in practice, what do you do to apply it? How do you take it? And then, what are you going to do? What's next? How can you read it? Where do you need to go? What's a couple of ideas of what you can follow and where you're going? What do you need to think about? How do you apply it? How do you take it into your organization?
How can I get my arms around this really important but difficult concept? And thought starters, yeah.
How can you apply it? To make it really deeply practical, manageable, and useful to people.
Jonathan and I both grew up, I think, over the last 20 or so years. Our formative experiences were in business, executive education, executive development. And the big shift, I think, that we've seen, certainly this century, has been it needs to be practical. Academic theory, which maybe was the thing that business schools were selling for a long time in the 70s and 80s, and where they came from, and all of that rigor, which is important. But it does need to have a practical payoff.
All the evidence says you've got to apply concepts. You've got to be able to take it into your concept, into your practice, your day, to your team, your bosses, your peers. How can you apply it and make it work to actually have an effect? Because this is about creating long-term sustained change, which would be for yourself, your team, your peers, your organization, your shareholders, or whoever. And that applies to the personal side as well. Talked about direct growth mindset. I was delighted when I saw growth mindset 10 years ago being applied in a business concept. As I was my wife and I were fairly new parents, and applying it in our growing children who are now horrible teenagers. But it was wonderful to see it in the business concept because it's so practical, both personally and professionally, as a way to develop and grow. This was a concept that's been around for a long time.
For me, at least, the hardest thing was writing those short, thought-starting questions. So we're taking a concept, and I was mindful and feeling the pressure of the reader. And they can be not of my culture or in a completely different part of the world, a completely different industry, context, time even. And yet we wanted them to be able to use and apply and engage with this topic. So what 5 or 6 questions could we ask them that would help them translate the concept to their context? Coming up with 5 or 6 questions to do that is really, I can write a whole book quicker than I can come up with those questions, because it was tough.
And it was tough, and it needed several edits and work throughs. And it's also relevant thought starters, the questions that are equally relevant to your brand new graduate who's joining an organization,
Right.
through to board member, CPO, CEO, and everyone in between. How can it be relevant to people? Creating a common language.
Imagine one of the challenges with the amount of ideas in that, trying to understand. Any advice you have for leaders who feel overwhelmed with the competing models and the different frameworks that you've presented? Is there a particular way they should start to digest the book or get their mind around the different frameworks and such?
Shall I go first? So what I recommend, if you've just bought the book, have a skim through, see what's there, and see what speaks to you. Whatever resonates with you from the 50, maybe have a look at those, and then put it on the shelf, and maybe have in mind 1 or 2 things that you want to take forward. That might be the way to start. And then, as things progress, if you are struggling with the need to innovate, or to develop the team, or to give feedback, or whatever the challenge happens to be, then have a look. There'll probably be something in 50 ideas to help you unblock your thinking. And to your wider question, Brian, about generally how should leaders engage with the ideas, I think it's about focus, isn't it? I'll come back to John Whitmore's GROW model. What's the goal? So don't try and boil the ocean. If you're a senior exec, or if you've just not a senior exec, but you've got a lot on your plate, break it down into manageable, achievable goals. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. What is that single step? What am I trying to achieve here? It's easier to move towards something positive than away from a negative.
Mhm.
So what's that exciting, motivational thing you're trying to achieve? And hopefully there'll be ideas, questions, or a tool or two help you in the book. So I use it that way.
That's a great segue to the last question. Looking ahead, are there any emerging ideas or trends that you think will become the 51st idea, or it's the start for your next chapter of the next book?
That gives me the greatest curiosity, maybe, is with the world changing so fast within geopolitics globally around where we are, what's evolving, what's coming out that is rocketing to the top of the next list for where we are. And that's we've set up a dedicated LinkedIn community page to really garner some thoughts and start thought leadership on that. What's the discussion point? What are people seeing? What are readers, current and future, wanting to know about? Because we are 2 individuals with some thoughts.
I would encourage people to share their ideas and their experience and not be afraid to codify it. I mean, it does occur to me that there are lots of things, lots of compelling ideas. So to take a couple, growth mindset and lean in, that have really caught fire this century, really. I mean, in the last 20 years, they may have had antecedents a little bit before that, for sure. But it's only really in the last 10 or 20 years, ideas as profound and important as those have taken off. So the 51st idea, I hope, is being piloted, is changing workplaces even as we speak. There's a slight irony here, because one of the ideas that Jonathan and I really value is ambidextrous thinking. This is the idea that you have to exploit your business model and your success today, but that can't be all you do. You have to balance that, whether it's your career, whether it's your team's success, whether it's the organization's direction, whatever it is. Focus today has to be balanced with an exploration of the future. So we call it exploiting today and exploring future, explore and exploit. And that kind of ambidextrous thinking is really, really important. So if there's one meta idea, it would be that. So we've got 50 ideas that are great, that will support you, turbocharge your career, support your organization, all those things. But that's not it. Things move on. Man, there'd better be a second edition of this book.
If you're thinking about an innovative mindset, you can always have growth mindset hand in hand with the ambidexterity. Maybe, coupled together with the situational leadership, because that's where your mindset's going to go. It's about how you've got to navigate forward in the world. I mean, it's difficult to link it all down.
Well, it's a great opportunity. Encourage everybody to grab a copy of the book to get their mind thinking about both old and new ideas and then how to apply that moving forward. Thank you both for being on Inside Outside Innovation. What's the best way for them to connect with you or find out more about the book or more about yourselves?
So we've got a dedicated website with our contact details on. It's 50ideas.world is the website, or we've got the LinkedIn community page as well. We'd love to hear from people, hear views, hear thoughts, hear what's missing, as well as feedback.
Excellent. Well, Jeremy and Jonathan, thanks again for being on the show and look forward to the next 50 plus ideas.
Real pleasure, Brian. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. If you want to learn more about our team, our content, our services, check out insideoutside.io or follow us on Twitter @the IO Podcast or @Ardinger. Until next time, go out and innovate.